the anchor that they have, because they're in a country that they're afraid of. They're afraid of what when they already pay so much money to be in this country. How by immigration being deported, back to their country. Basically, turn around. It's bigger than him. Ha, him, ha, him, ha, him. It's bigger than him. Ha, him, ha, him. The problem is that the kids need to look for somewhere. And that's why you have kids that are going out into those communities where their parents migrated to, and they're being faced with all the socio-economical problems, that exist in those communities. They got gangs, they got drugs, they got alcoholism, they got prostitution, they got all those things in their community, but they don't have those resources there to deal with those problems that these kids have. Basically counseling, recreational facilities that are accessible to them, or even programs that can help out. Our organization did not come into existence till 1998. And since then, we've helped in the community, but it's not enough. It's not enough. We run tattoo removal programs. We run counseling for our youth. We got a reentry program where we get people that are coming out of prison that want to remove their tattoos, but they have to go through our programs in order to understand what freedom is, right? And we have many of our youngsters now that, what we talked about in regards to the globalization, and how it's impacted our countries of origin. You have many of them fleeing now and requesting us to remove their tattoos. So you have some of the images that you see sometimes in the news, the sensationalization of the gangs and the MS-13 on their faces, and you've seen those images on documentaries such in Gangland and National Geographic, all those gang documentaries where you see the Salvadorans with their face all written on, and those images that they show. Well, we have some of those youngsters that are fleeing, and they're coming to this country, not because they want to, but because of the impact of the globalization and the way that they're targeting gangs now in Central America. So they've always dealt with it with suppression. When they started realizing that they had this issue in our communities in the 80s, they started arresting all the youngsters. And MS-13 was not like a Cholo-style gang. Originally, it was a stoner gang, right? It was a group of people that were into heavy metal, right? AC/DC, Metallica, and all of those, long hair, right? But once they started getting arrested, the institutionalization of these youngsters changed their appearance, changed the way they talk, changed the way they walk, changed the way they appear, and changed the whole context of the gang. Because they created this gang not just become hoodlums and drug dealers or create violence in their community. They created it because they were under attack. They were under attack culturally by other groups. So what happens when you're under attack? You try to protect yourself. And the group originally, that's how it started. Protecting each other, protecting their culture, because many of the youth, unlike me, that came into this country in the late 70s, and instead of being proud of being Salvadoran, because there were hardly any Salvadorans in the community or in school, I tried to assimilate the culture that was there. And it was mostly Mexicano, Chicano. So I talked for the most part like a Mexicano during those days. So in order to survive, you had to hide your identity. You had to hide your culture, be embarrassed of it, of who you were. And many like me hid it. Many kids that were troubled even joined a different gang that was Chicanos, and forever they thought that these guys were Mexicans, although they were Salvadorans. But in the early 80s, there was another group that decided not to assimilate to the culture that was there and said, we're going to protect ourselves. And that's how the MSS developed. They started protecting each other from all these other cultural oppressors that were in the area, kids that did just not understand us.
So when I met him in like 82, 83 in junior high, you know, I was proud to see somebody that was speaking with my original accent, that was not afraid to speak up and say, I'm Salvadoran. And it attracted me so much that I left, you know, because I was already getting involved in gangs, you know. I left those youngsters that I was with and joined this group of gang members because it attracted me socially, culturally, and I felt protected by my own people. But if there would have been something there that would have helped me deal with this cultural clash, I probably would have decided to join the gang. Probably all these other kids wouldn't have joined this gang. But because the efforts was always, the focus was always on oppression and suppression, you know, many of these youngsters eventually end up getting involved in more violence, because once you're in a gang, you know, violence will come your way either personally, or it will hit some of your friends that you develop to care about, that protect you. Even if you guys are homeless together, you guys are protecting each other. So eventually, you know, you go to jail, you go to prison, you end up, and that happened to me. You know, and once I came out of juvenile hall in '87, I ended up getting shot. So I got shot on my both legs and my arm. But that does not stop. It didn't stop me from continuing, because in the gang, once you become involved in gangs, you create a belief system around that environment in which you believe in, and in which you started to believe in, that develop into your life existence. You will not function with what you believe in. It's kind of believing in God. You know, you believe in God, you let God take control of your life. You know, but for many of these youngsters, it becomes kind of a religious involvement. It becomes addictive. It becomes an addiction because you dream it. Even if you're busted, you're only dreaming about walking that street, about being with your homies, about doing your things in the neighborhood, about the homegirls and whatnot. You know, but it had never been approached in a mental health way. It has never been approached as with real clear alternatives. It's always been locking them up. So in '92, after the peace accords in El Salvador, for the most part, Salvadorans really started being deported in mass. They had always been deported, but because of the war and the conflict, many of them were able to receive some protection around asylum or being able to stay in this country. But once the peace accords, it was like, there's no war down there anymore. You don't need protection, and they started deporting everybody, especially individuals that were coming out of jail. They had been stopped by law enforcement, they had criminal records. All these individuals started being deported. And it was taken as a technique, once again, you know, to reduce violence in the city of LA, or in the country for that aspect. You know, because it was like, we gotta deport all these criminal immigrants. And that was in '92, it's focused on El Salvador and Central America, you know. But in 2006, there was a new approach in the way to target what became to known criminal immigrants. They developed policies, federal policies, that really now targeted anybody that had committed a crime, with a law that came in that was called the IRA, and the Anti-Terrorist Act law that came in '96 to target specifically the population of immigrants. So once again, it was sold. We got to get those immigrants out of here, those criminals out of this country, and they'll reduce violence. But what happened, it was basically, it evolutionized the way that gangs function. It also globalized the whole issue of gangs. And it globalized the approach as well. Because during the same times that the talks were happening around CAFTA, the same time that they were talking about how do we